Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. I'm going to read a section from this book by Garry Wills about the history written by Henry Adams, which I have only recently finished reading. Let me start with a quick sentence from Wills. Even when they understand it, which few have taken the trouble to do, some will not like Adams's history. A bit arrogant, really. Obviously, Wills is the only person who has taken the trouble to understand it. Well, I spent a good part of this past year reading the history by Adams, and I can't say that I understand it completely. Reading this book represents further effort on my part to understand it. In the end, I dispute a lot of Wills's interpretations of the work by Henry Adams. However, I would like to read a few paragraphs that I think are really good. So, Wills, of course, would dispute that I have even read the book. He says most people who claim that they have read the history by Henry Adams are lying. And then he says, in the case where they have actually read the book, they are misreading the book because they are imputing to the history by Henry Adams a pessimism which they have previously culled from a different book by Henry Adams, the more famous The Education of Henry Adams. I have not read that more famous book, and the sense of pessimism that I derived from the history is something that I saw there myself. I do not have the ebullient positivity that Wills seems to have derived from the history. But be that as it may, I would recommend that you read the history written by Henry Adams if you are interested in that time period in American history. It's definitely an important period to understand how the country went from the 13 distinct colonies into one unified federal consolidation. The book is really useful. Now, if I can find where I need to be. Okay, I will read a little bit from a paragraph before the main part that I want to read. Wills says, if one were to ask for the two leading figures in American history during the first 16 years of the 19th century, the normal answer might be Jefferson and Madison. Adams, on the other hand, thinks they were Jefferson and Napoleon. That's very good. I don't know that Adams has said that explicitly, but that seems a fair appraisal. Madison, of course, comes across as something of a nullity. Some creature riding upon the shirt tails or coat tails of Jefferson with little impetus or initiative of his own beyond that. So something of a shadow of Jefferson in a way, Jefferson's shadow. But the paragraphs that I would like to read take on that theme. And I should say he quotes Adams from his letters, and he quotes the Constance Garnett translation of Tolstoy. I read a different translation of Tolstoy in January, possibly into February, but this book really makes a nice bookend to my year. Meaning that I went into the year not knowing a thing about Napoleon. I read Tolstoy's novel, and I wondered, somehow the War of 1812 must figure in with the events going on in Europe, and indeed, they did. Now, I have a cat right up by the camera, and this is actually my second attempt at a video, and the cat had nefarious objectives in mind, which disrupted the whole thing. So I will give it a moment. If you note the shaking there, he's left the dangerous perch for now. So let me start with the excerpt. To emphasize from the outset the importance of Napoleon to the Jeffersonian administrations, Adams introduces him in the History's first volume with a Miltonic flourish. Most picturesque of all figures in modern history, Napoleon Bonaparte, like Milton's Satan on his throne of state, although surrounded by a group of figures little less striking than himself, sat unapproachable on his bad eminence, or when he moved, the dusky air felt an unusual weight. To tell the story of these years without an awareness of Napoleon's role, or, for that matter, of the role of the British ministers, the Russian Tsar, the Spanish king, is like describing a boxing match in which only one fighter is visible. ... To say that Jefferson and Napoleon are the contending giants in Adams's history is not, oddly enough, to say that he is writing great man history. These two are like Napoleon and his Russian rival, General Kutuzov, in War and Peace. Men doing they knew not what, borne along by their people, by their foes, by accident, or by concatenating factors seen and unseen, so that they accomplish very often the exact opposite of what they intended. Napoleon abets or baffles Jefferson into policies that succeed despite Jefferson's will. But Napoleon, too, is baffled over and over while he acts with an illusion of control. In Egypt, in Saint-Domingue, in Spain, in Russia, at the English Channel. Adams and Tolstoy, contemporaries who were writing about the same Napoleonic years, are the supreme ironists of their subject. While working on the history in 1883, Adams reflected on how his leading figures were being led. In regard to them, I am incessantly forced to devise excuses and apologies, or to admit that no excuse will avail. I am at times almost sorry that I ever undertook to write their history, for they appear like mere grasshoppers, kicking and gesticulating in the middle of the Mississippi River. There is no possibility of reconciling their theories with their acts or their extraordinary foreign policy with dignity. My own conclusion is that history is simply social development along the lines of weakest resistance, and that in most cases the line of weakest resistance is found as unconsciously by society as by water. Over and over, Tolstoy shows his characters carried along by actions they thought they were guiding. Pierre into a marriage forced on him, Napoleon into an invasion forced on him by an unseen hand. To attribute large events to a great man, he said, is like thinking that the hand on the face of a clock moves the hidden clockworks behind the face rather than vice versa. We are all in the plight of General Weyrother, who thought he was in charge at the Battle of Austerlitz. He was like a horse in harness running downhill with a heavy load behind him. Whether he were pulling it or it were pushing him, he could not have said, but he was flying along at full speed with no time to consider where this swift motion would land him. Why, with this view of things, do Adams and Tolstoy dwell on their respective leading figures? And he goes on, but I liked having the pairing of those two, both Adams and Tolstoy, writing about the Napoleonic years. Wills goes on to quote a little bit more in detail Tolstoy's theories on history, which, if you saw my videos early in the year, were the part that I least enjoyed from the novel War and Peace. So my end reaction, and I have about 7 pages yet to go in a final epilogue with this, which hopefully I will knock out tonight. But my feeling is that this book is not especially worth one's while. It's mainly a retelling of Henry Adams. Henry Adams is certainly worth one's while. So I will leave that there. Possibly I will sum up further in some video, but I did want to share those several paragraphs with you. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.